Hi, my name's Roy Todd. I'm the pastor here at the Junction Church. We are having an ongoing conversation as a church. It's not just about racism, but it's about how we can develop a greater understanding of people's experiences, because the term racism itself is, whilst a true term, can also be an unhelpful term in the sense that that we can be ignorant of the stories, the individual stories. We just have it as this all-encompassing term, but actually this is people, and this is real people in real lives. And if you've listened to the last or watched the last episode, you'll have got a sense that that this really does impact people, and it has a massive impact on their lives. And of course, as a church, we will want to do everything that we possibly can to make sure, number one, that that's never a culture that's a part of our church family, but actually, number two, that we're challenging the culture of society where this still very much is in existence, and we want to challenge it. And if the church can't speak up about this, then who can? So let's go to you, SJ, first. You very courageously shared with us in the last episode about your experiences growing up, and even during, for example, the pandemic, you experienced racism because of the perception that the virus came from China. You're not even, your family ancestry is not even from China. Your family are from Korea. How does somebody, if somebody came, and forgive me even if the way that I put this is not entirely right, but if somebody wanted to sort of learn from, about your experiences, what would be a way of approaching that? What level of ignorance is acceptable? Maybe that's the best way. Because obviously there is a level of ignorance. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable in terms of that conversation? Can you help us with that?
Yeah, I think just for me, well, not even just for me, but I think a lot of Southeast Asian cultures and countries, again, like I was saying from my personal experiences, I didn't like to talk about any of this sort of stuff. I've had to sort of kept it bottled inside of me for the past 20 years. And I've only recently just started feeling comfortable about talking about racism basically right now. So I think just being curious about it and actually being honest about having that heart of honesty and really wanting to understand the issues that Asian people actually do experience. I think that would really help. And yeah, creating an environment where you really are curious about wanting to learn and wanting to challenge racist remarks and racial slurs that Asian people do face.
So looking back, you're obviously doing really well now, and certainly, you're doing a good degree at university. You're a super smart guy. But looking back, and obviously life changes, life is different. The fact that you're at university, the fact that you're, in a different context and so on. But looking back at SJ when he was at school, primary school, secondary school, going through what would have been helpful, and address that on multiple levels. For example, you mentioned that in some of the South Asian communities, there's a reluctance to even talk about this, but it would have been helpful if there had been a conversation. Would that be right?
I think for me personally, just for me not be able to experience that freely, basically, and not have a burden of, I feel like it's a burden on me if I do talk to about this topic on someone. Because I remember in secondary school, I would go to teachers and I would talk to them about it, but they just really almost just dismiss it and just disregard anything I'd be talking to them about when I did tell them what was going on. And because of that even deterred me to even talk about it at all in general. That just kept pushing me away from talking about it. So just a bit, I guess, just being that friend that is supportive and actually does want to listen and genuinely does want to listen to the challenges and the problems that you are facing. That's something that I think people that do experience, especially from Asian people that do experience racism, really do need someone that would just basically listen and be there to try and understand the issues that you face.
And that's really helpful. And yourself, Regan, then obviously you talked in the last episode about your experiences from a mixed race background, and you were talking about the complexity of that, and of course then you your coping mechanism was to carve out your very own identity, which took you on a path that if you had followed that path to its logical conclusion, you probably wouldn't even be sitting here tonight. And we would say the grace of God has had a huge impact on your life. But in terms of the conversation, how does somebody, what's a right way to approach this conversation, and what's a wrong way to approach the conversation about, what was it like for you when you were growing up? What experiences? Because you've obviously had it from multiple levels. How can somebody strike up a conversation, and what might that sound like?
Yeah, I mean, the battle I feel is internal. People can come with questions as a fad. They can throw around the word diversity as a buzzword to look good, to act as if they care about the issue. But ultimately, people need to look at their heart.
Yeah, that's good.
Are they coming with a heart to actually want to understand and learn more?
Right.
If they're not, don't bother starting a conversation, because they'll say these words with the impression or the thought that it will make them look good and I'll think better of them for it. But first of all, I think people need to look at their heart. Like, do you actually want to learn more and understand? And if so, then we can have a conversation. And it really is just as simple as asking, what are your experiences? How can I be better? Even if you're black and you experience racism yourself, what are the nuances that you experience as a mixed race individual that are different from maybe what I experience? Because I feel like maybe if we undergo racism, sometimes we can get in the mindset of maybe being ignorant of other people's racism and the nuances that they experience. So it's important, like Lowry said, it's unique. No one's situation is the same. So I think putting our pride aside and saying, okay, I might be going through something, but people are going through something as well, and it could be completely different to what I'm going through, and I might even be contributing to that myself.
And yourself, Ori, would you have anything to add to what Regan has just said?
Yeah, I think it's really important that everyone is willing to be a student in this conversation. Whoever has the most knowledge or the experience in that conversation should be facilitating it and should be the teacher as such. But that doesn't mean that you can then also become the student, because we're always learning and hearing about other people's experiences, and everything's still changing, and there's always more that we could be learning, more we could be researching. And so if people, like Regan said, if people have the right heart posture, especially when they're coming to you asking for advice or asking kind of what have you experienced, that they're not coming to tell you their grievances or almost put that perception that, oh, so racism is a thing, but I'm not a racist. So what I'm coming to you with, make sure that you don't perceive me as a racist, because there's definitely that assumption sometimes where you're having difficult conversations with people and you're saying, okay, some of the behavior that you've experienced, it's making me feel uncomfortable, and what you're saying isn't correct. It's hurting me. And there's almost that jump all of a sudden, are you calling me a racist? And that isn't helpful to the conversation at all, because if we don't explicitly say that word, then the assumption that you've made has then shifted the conversation. So it's not about me and my experiences and what's happened and how we can deal with it, but about what is the perception of that other person to other people in society.
I opened up this episode by talking about the word racist and racism, and talked about the danger of the term, that it can just be a general term that people can use and neglect the individual stories, which of course every story is different. But I would like to come back to that term racism then. What is racism? I mean, what is it at its core? How would you define it?
That's a difficult question, because I think racism is an umbrella term, and there's lots of different things that are encompassed within racism, and the way that an individual of colour perceives what is racist to them can be very different depending on the person and their experiences. So things such as microaggressions, which aren't blatant racisms, they aren't specific words that everyone knows is racist.
Yeah.
They're more just terms or nuances or ways of saying things that is perceived as someone being other. They're harder to kind of define, and they might hurt one person because of the experiences that they've had and the things that they've been through, but you could say it to another person and they could not find it offensive. And so racism encompasses a lot, but it mainly boils down to prejudice and just treating someone different because of the color of their skin.
Would you have anything to add to that, SJ, in terms of that definition of racism?
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad topic, isn't it? But like Ori said, it involves those microaggressions, and you can't. There's no like explicit. Basically, this is a microaggression and this isn't, because like you can. There are ways to make things microaggressions. So like we were discussing in the previous episodes, asking someone where you really from, that is a microaggression. That is a racial microaggression. And then there's things like racial slurs as well, which are terms that are used to intentionally be derogatory, and there you go, that's the term, and just insulting to a person of an ethnic minority.
They talk about,
so things like for me, against Southeast Asian people, calling them a chink or calling them chinky, that is a racial slur against them. So these sort of terms, that they're all involved in what racism actually is.
so there's overt and covert.
Covert,
So no, overt is just overtly
Blatant and
blatant bias, an intentional, conscious bias. Whereas covert would be an unintentional or an unconscious bias, we might say.
Yeah.
So that is very, very helpful.
Because I think with overt as well, it's like, you're treating somebody differently. So people see that and people recognize that kind of racism a lot more now as well. Still more work to be done, but people will see, for example, someone said to me, you can't come in because of your skin color. People will observe that and pick up on that. But I've had before, like, people going, oh, are you growing your hair because of your religion? But that's a microaggression because you wouldn't ask that to someone who's white.
Yes.
But you've put assumption on me. And I think that's where, with education, that needs to happen. It's not, because I've had it before when somebody said that, oh, but, they're just asking that, and it is right that most Asian people, grow their hair for religious purposes and stuff. But you wouldn't ask that to a white person, or you wouldn't put an assumption on a white person, but you're doing it on me.
Yes.
And that's the microaggression. You've put kind of something subtly said that, but actually you're just assuming that all Asian people are growing their hair because of their religion, rather than I'm an individual that asking me, oh, how come you have long hair? You've just assumed something of that.
So it's subtle. It can be subtle, and that is very, very helpful and very, very insightful.
And I think that's where the learning needs to come in as well.
Yes.
Because what these boys have said is really good in terms of just being a student. I think Ori used that phrase, because a lot of the time people will be like, oh, but I'm not racist, I'm not this. But a lot of us, even myself, I've had to learn and go on the journey, and I'm sure a lot of you guys will agree as well that we've had to go on the journey to learn ourselves, because there's stuff we've done probably that we've got it wrong as well. So none of us are perfect. None of us have got it right. We're all learning on this journey, and it's looking at yourself and being like, okay, so how can I learn? So it's, okay, when I'm asking a phrase, what's my intention? Would I do it to somebody who's white? If I'm not going to ask it to somebody who's white, why am I asking them that question then? And it's looking at yourself and almost not assuming anything, but giving yourself that room to be like, okay, like, how can I learn? And not assuming anything about anybody, really, I would say.
And I think even on the topic of learning, I think it's really important. I know that we've kind of touched on this already, but then, people kind of coming and wanting to know experiences is that they have to care. And one thing I say with that is, again, going back to the situation, with George Floyd in 2020, 2021, around then. And then I remember people would, some of my friends would tell me that they would have people come to them and say, oh, that's really interesting. So, like, what's happening with the George Floyd thing? Well, it's over the internet. Like, if you really care about it, like, you actually like research and like you want to know what's happening. So rather than someone just coming to you and asking to tick a box of saying, oh, I care because I've asked you the question. It's actually, no, if you do care, you would actually check up on this thing and see actually, what's actually going on. How can I actually play my part? And I think one thing I wanted to mention on learning is, not to I know a few of the guys, Regan has already said it. It's not just to tick a box, but then actually to actually want to know, to want to learn, to want to again approach a situation in a way where actually, I don't want to, say something offensive or, do something that would hurt someone else. I think that's one thing I wanted to mention off the back of that. And another thing actually I wanted to mention in approaching a situation is not to come from a point of view of, for example, if I have a friend who's white and who is coming to me and has heard about my experiences, to say, oh, like, I feel so sorry for being white. It's like, well, no, that's not really going to help me.
It's not
like,
helpful.
Exactly. Like, that's not, like, I don't...
Because it's making it about them, isn't it?
100%. And it's not about, I feel bad because of, like, what someone else has done. It's like, no, like, again, we all need to learn about this, and it's not about, like, I feel bad, like, how can I like make you feel. And that's one thing I want to say is that, I'm a person. I'm not a project. I'm not asking you to try and fix me or to try and see me with this sadness as this, like, low person. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. I want you to be empathetic and to care and to ask about my hurts. But again, I don't want you to then come and feel sorry for the color of your skin. No, like, that's not what we're having this conversation for. And I think that's what's really important to point out.
And I think that as a pastor as well, if we take the conversation then in a theological direction, it is totally appropriate that we have this conversation, because if you look at the Bible and you study the Bible, God clearly wants us to be challenged about this. I mean, the example that comes to mind is the Old Testament book of Jonah, which they say is amongst the first books actually of the Bible in terms of chronology, anyway. And this, we often say that the story of Jonah is about the conversion of the people at Nineveh, because he refused to go. But the real truth is that the story of Jonah is about the conversion of the prophet called Jonah, because it was his prejudice that stopped him going to Nineveh to reach people. I mean, it was when he went after the belly of the whale and all that, all the stuff you've heard sermons about over the years. I remember hearing a guy get it all wrong. He talked about how the Jonah swallowed a whale. That's actually true. But the whole point of that story is to do with God challenging prejudice. So this conversation is a biblical conversation. This is a really important conversation to God, because God was challenging Jonah's heart that you see those people like that, but actually I see them like this. So theologically, I think that there's a wider conversation here, which is to do with seeing things from God's perspective.
Definitely.
And racism is not just wrong so far as God is concerned. It is sinful. And that's very serious. That's a very serious conversation to be had. So sinful that he gave us the book of Jonah to show us how wrong this is. And if you look at Jonah, the Old Testament character of Jonah, it's like it should be a happy ending, but he died a bitter old man. His heart hadn't really changed that much. He was still the grumpy old prophet who went begrudgingly. And when he preached to the people of Nineveh, the people, sackcloth and ashes out, they repented. It wasn't even an issue to them. So the issue was Jonah's heart rather than the people at Nineveh. And again, I think it's very much a heart issue.
Definitely.
Anybody anything to add to that?
Definitely, Pastor Roy, because I've had it before. If I'm sharing a story, people will tell me, oh, but I don't see anything wrong with that. So you're automatically telling me how. So I gave the hair example. Oh, but I don't see anything wrong with asking that question. It's, but you're telling me how I should feel and how my experience should be, rather than being like, I'm sorry that happened to you. What can I do better? How can I learn? And that thing of, Ori said it earlier about, speaking out and calling stuff out. We talked about it in the first episode. It's, I think we were all young children a lot of the time when we experienced a lot of the racism. So we've kind of grown up with it. And I sometimes wish I had people that kind of had my back, because there's moments in school, even teachers wouldn't, because they would be like, I remember one teacher said, oh, but what did you do first? Like automatically, rather than, and I was naughty in school. So I could understand why they assumed why I'd misbehaved, but instead of squashing racism, it's, oh, but what did you do first?
There was
Instead
an
of being like,
assumption there that
Yeah.
it was somehow your fault.
yeah, and even if I had done something, it's not saying, well, that's racist, or you cannot say that, and I'm going to kind of deal with that for it. It's almost, oh, but that's only in retaliation, rather than that's not acceptable behaviour whatsoever kind of thing as well. And I was going to say, in terms of the speaking up thing as well, it's also kind of educating yourself as well. Laulu mentioned about looking up online, because a lot of the time people have gone kind of like, oh, go back to your own country, or why are you even here kind of thing.
Yeah.
But what they don't realise, I mean, I'm not going to get political on anything, but for me, for example, the reason why my parents came to this country was they were fleeing a war, which all stemmed from the British Empire. When they left, there was no kind of control in Sri Lanka, so then that resulted in a massive civil war for 30 years, because that was only in the 1940s, 1950s, so it's not that long ago. The civil war only ended in 2009, and my parents, I mean, they woke up with bombs going off down the street, and they came to this country for a better life, so that they could have children without worrying about them growing up in bombs. So it's not that we've kind of just come in here to take over everything. It's now actually if you educate yourself, there's a reason why we've ended up here. And that's the thing I would say, like, you know, in terms of the prejudice, you're automatically assuming I've just come here for a joy. And no, actually my parents came here because they were fleeing a war, which all got inflicted by the British Empire all those years ago. So there's a reason. So it's just, I would say just educating yourself and not having that kind of assumption already, or that prejudice that somebody's a certain way, or oh, I'm assuming that about them. It's actually though, what's the result of this? I would say.
I just wanted to touch on what you said from like a theological perspective. So I done an interview today with a friend, and it was about basically Black Christian men and how faith helps them. I don't think that was an accident for it to be placed on the same day that we ended up doing this either. And it's gonna sound cliche, but Jesus is the answer to both the sufferer of racism and the giver of the racism. For the sufferer, speaking from my own experiences, when I was young and I was confused, I looked in the mirror and I didn't know who I was. And I didn't see any value when I looked in the mirror. But when I opened God's word, that's now my mirror. When I see God's word and the things God said about me, okay, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. You know, I'm His creation. I'm divine creation. When I see these things, it's that reinforcement to me that, okay, I'm good. God was very intentional about making me the way that I am, and there's no one that can tell me that that's not the case. And then for the giver of racism, again, seeing those things that God says about people and love and how God's creation is divine, it will make them think twice, I think, about when they're judging someone or the heart they're coming to someone with. Because when we see people as sons of God and not just a skin color or a human being, I think there's the added element of respect and love there for the creation. But I guess going back as well, one thing that I touched on earlier was resilience. When I did the interview, and I think faith and resilience are very much hand in hand. The stronger we are in faith, the more resilience we're going to have in the face of these challenges. Because if I'm stronger in faith, I'm not gonna listen to what someone says about me, that I'm worthless, that I don't identify with a group, or that I can't be part of their group. No, because God says I'm part of His family. And the stronger I'm in faith, the more I'm gonna believe the words that God is saying about me.
Wonderful.
So people need to, you know, if you're suffering right now, I'd say to anyone that's suffering, get into church. You know, find Jesus, and
really good.
You'll find your identity in Him.
And that brings us on then to what part church has to play in all of this then, in this important conversation. Now, obviously, we can only really talk from the perspective of the Junction Church, because I don't really know other churches, in all honesty. I think we're on a good journey as a church, but the danger of being on a good journey is that you can become self-satisfied and say, well, look what we're doing. And actually, the truth is that this is an ongoing journey, and we have an awful long way to go. I know that this pastor has an awful long way to go, and I hope that doesn't sound trite or whatever. It's from the heart. But we feel passionate about this and about creating a unity. Let's talk about unity then. And unity specifically to the source of the conversation that we're talking about today, something powerful happens in church. I mean, even just last Sunday morning, like we had this phenomenal worship time last Sunday morning. I was just like, I was a blubbering idiot at the front of Sunday morning. I don't even know what we were singing, but it was brilliant. And part of me, and I guess this is just the perspective of a pastor, is just having a little look around and saying, all these different people from all these different experiences, all these different backgrounds, and it's getting back to your point, Regan, and there we all are with our hands raised worshiping Jesus, who we all love and we all follow. We wouldn't even be in the same room together if it wasn't for God. We wouldn't even know each other. This is the genius of church. And I challenge anybody, you show me a community, like let's be specific to Loughborough, for example. Show me a community that's got the kind of diversity that church has got going on. You show me a community that's like that. I don't think that you will be able to show me a community that's like that. It is so unique and powerful. Talk to me for a few minutes, and obviously you're all going to be biased because you all love Jesus and you're all part of the Junction Church. I guess you love it, if you don't, you can just tell me, and and I'll resign or something at the end, publicly on the podcast. But what does that matter, and how can we as a church get better at making sure that we respect the various cultures and the various experiences that people have? Do you want to share a thought or two on that one, Ori?
Yeah. So I think something I noticed when I first came to Junction was just how refreshing it was to like be in a place where I actually feel at home and I feel comfortable being completely who I am. That's something that I never really experienced before. Even like in my own home, there's been issues with family where there have been family members that have been racist, and trying to navigate that. And especially when I was still quite new to faith, like how do I deal with the fact that my own like flesh and blood are racist towards me but still love me?
Wow.
But coming to Junction, it was never an issue about, these group of people like all hang out and they all the same race, and these group of people over there, like everyone's integrated, everyone has the light of Jesus in common, and everyone emulates that in the way that they act around each other. And that's something that is so important within a church community, that you're able to be fully yourself and be focused on serving Jesus, and that you don't have to worry about anything like that. So first of all, that is amazing. But I definitely think with churches, it's important to almost start from a blank slate. So I've been to a church before where it was my first time, and there were instance after instance where every person that I met was likening me to Zendaya. And that type of racism, even though it's a microaggression, but the fact that it's done through flattery, so people don't recognize that it's an issue.
So subtle, isn't it?
And so it was this thing of like feeling really uncomfortable because of all of those people had a culture where they felt like in order to relate to me, they had to pick on my race. And so it stems all the way down to the culture and the way that people are inviting people in, the way people are conducting conversations, the things that they choose to talk about. And is being able as a church to start from a place where, okay, we're going to completely ignore kind of what the system says, what is going on, because it is broken in what it does say and how it does perceive different races. And we're just going to focus on showing who Jesus is and loving on people and just recognizing who they are for how they serve and for the way that they just continue to live.
Just to add to that as well, with the word unity, Pastor Roy, a lot of people, it means one, but people, I've heard in churches, we don't see colour though, we're all human beings, we're all children of God. But I have a massive problem with that, because that's the beauty of God's creation, is we are all unique individuals made in different ways. And I think that's what I love about the Junction Church. We have unity, but in the way of, wow, we are all different people, but coming together for one God and worshipping one God, rather than, we're all one, we don't see colour, because that's very different things. It's actually looking at the beauty that God has put in this world as individuals from different backgrounds, different cultures, different races that have come together. And I think that's what the Junction Church does so well, and if other churches could learn that actually there's beauty in God's creation and celebrating that, like we're proudful about the fact that we have over 50 nationalities represented at our church, because we want to be a place where no matter who you are, you're welcome at the church. And it's going back to what Ori was saying, it's that blank slate. It's not what society's telling you. We don't care about all of that. Anyone's welcome here, no matter where you come from. We're going to celebrate you. We're going to love on you. We're going to encourage you.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you're from. We love the fact that you're from a different background, different culture, different location. That's amazing. We're going to celebrate that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, again, I mean, you've mentioned it at the start with, like looking at racism, and we can look at this as this broad thing that we then forget about the individuals. And I think as important as it is, people like looking out there and obviously looking like their own research for all the podcasts. And I think people most especially learn through relationships and through like the individual relations with a person. So that's why when I shared about my experience, the reason why I felt supported wasn't just because someone then just came out and said, oh yeah, like we feel sorry for like all black people, for like all these kind of people. It's actually, in my experience, it's actually I called Pastor Fraser, one of our pastors here at the Junction afterwards. I know he cared for me, and he cared for my experience. I remember even like after one experience as well, Noel took me to have some food, and again, it's about caring for the individual. And I think again, people need to be aware of what they're saying to individuals, and actually the relationships that they have with individuals as well. And I actually think, you know what, I have a black friend, I have an Asian friend, I have a mixed race friend. Am I doing things to them? Am I saying things to them that actually I'm not aware of? And actually coming to them in conversation with that, I know being open and honest and saying, actually, like I don't know how to approach this. Like how can I do this? In this way, in that way, rather than just trying to see this as a blanket thing and forgetting about the individuals, because the whole is really important, but then it's individuals that are being affected, and I think it's for people to actually like realize the individuals matter and trying to take that seriously as well.
It's brilliant, Lalo. I mean, I guess that even in a church context, as good as a journey that we're on, and I love that thought that you brought about a blank sheet. We are a blank sheet. We have the opportunity to carve something, to create something fresh and unique and different. And I think that's the genius of like the Junction Church. But even in that context, there will be times when people might say something that's wrong, insensitive, an inappropriate joke, an inappropriate comment, and so the onus, of course, of that will always be on the individual, because they need to kind of recognize that. How do you think, though, we can challenge that in a way that gets the win? So you can obviously challenge that and say what you said is wrong, but is there a helpful way? And and maybe this is an out of line question, please forgive me. Is there an unhelpful way to challenge that so that you get the win? Does that make sense?
On a one-on-one individual sort of basis, I would sort of challenge them and tell them how I'd feel about that comment, especially if it's someone I knew well within the church. I think, I'd just challenge them on that, and just to reflect on what they sort of said and why. I'd try and challenge them and try and educate them on why that could have been quite a racist remark, or whatever they said, why it could be hurtful towards me.
Yes.
And I think like usually I wouldn't, like in the past, from my experiences, I would have just left it, and again like I would probably laugh it off, and that was my coping mechanism. But again, because of the unity that we have with this church, and because I feel like we've got such a safe environment, and I know like yourself, Pastor Rory, and we've got all these senior people who are going to be supportive of and stand up against racism. I know that I can actually speak out against it and actually challenge these people, whoever, like if they ever do sort of make a racist remark or whatever they say.
Do you think they add to that?
I'd say the same approach, to be honest. I think embarrassing them maybe in a public situation, people could overhear things and then perceive them to be a racist, which is not necessarily the case. People make mistakes. They say things out of maybe uneducation or not just a realization of what they've actually said. So definitely you're having that conversation in private, like SJ said. Then I think expressing why that hurt me would be important.
Yeah, definitely.
But then also so that they really feel something. But then also being a bit more general with it, like, okay, what other things, I want them to know what other things they could say that would cause the same reaction from someone else. Because I think if we're specific, okay, they might make a certain remark and I know to not make that certain remark again. But there's another remark they could make which could have the same reaction. So I'd want to try and be more clear to them about what's acceptable and what's not and where the line is. Like we all make jokes sometimes. Like it's I don't think we should ever succumb to shame and being fearful and living out of fear of being racist, because there's no way to live. But at the same time, there is a line, and I think the people suffering need to be clear about what that line is, so that people know when they're crossing it.
And there is joking that can even happen. Hopefully, it doesn't happen in our church. I mean, I'm sure it may well do, but we try to protect against that. But there is a sort of a joking, a put down culture. It feels that it's acceptable to make comments. We actually try to dissuade that. Yeah. We try to discourage that in the Junction Church. Yeah. I mean, I know that if I try to joke, I got plenty of material sitting right here. No shortage of material to joke about me. Self-deprecating. I hate that term. I just would prefer to just focus on. I think I've got the confidence to just look at myself and say I don't always get it right. Funny enough, when I preach, it's never my theological points that people come to me afterwards and say that helped me. It was the fact that I was just honest about messing it up somewhere. Thank God I can breathe now. But for me, that kind of helps. People can get carried away, over familiar. And that we just need to be very, very careful about that. We need to always watch out for that, because we just don't want to go there. So we want to have, but we don't want it to be a joyless, humorless place. You can have lots of humor, lots of fun, but just quit the put down culture. That's what I would say. Just quit it. Never ever put anybody down. Never ever put anybody down. Always look to build them up, always look to strengthen them. We should be seeking those opportunities in church, and for me that's what makes all the difference. As we bring it to an end, any other observations on any of that?
I think that in general, churches should not try and fit inclusivity or inclusion into what they're doing, but inclusivity should be in the foundations of what
that's really good
who they are and what they do, because inclusion is just an act. It could be just like standing up and being like, oh, there's a movement at the moment, let's talk about it. It could be, like you said, I think in the past podcast, like churches writing out a letter saying this is what we stand for. But if they're not actually practicing what they're preaching, it filters through to the culture, and then people believe that certain things can be acceptable and can slide because of they believe that's kind of what the church carries. So it's about constantly making sure that even just things like this, having this conversation right now is so important, because it's keeping the conversation continuous, and the fact that people are aware of what is going on and facilitating the conversations that can be had.
100%. And I was going to say, even like to add on to that as well, I mean, even again before it became a big thing during COVID, if I can say in the Junction Church, I remember as a student, like we were just having like a random guys and it was a conversation that we then ended up having, and I think that's something that I really loved about the Junction Church, and I was like, actually, like I'm proud to say that this is my church, because actually it was a topic, even when it wasn't popular, that we still had, that we know that we still talked about, and after that then filtered down to talking about it in church, to then actually with my own mates and with my own friends in church, then talking to them about it. And if we see church, as the standard, and I guess like the kind of way that we should like live our lives, actually when church sets that example, like I said, of having those conversations when at that time no one like was talking about it, but then church did, and like that made me then think when those times during COVID and the George Floyd things, like when then they happened, I was like, actually I know that my church isn't doing this for like tokenism, actually, but I know that they care, because like we've had these like convos like before, and we'll have it again. And right now it's not trending on Twitter like or X, whatever it's called right now, like it's not a popular topic, but then actually we're talking about it because it matters. And that's something I really appreciate, and I think it's important for all churches to bear in mind as well.
Can I add to that as well? I think with churches as well, too often we're like, oh, but you know, that person's a good person, they didn't mean it like that, or oh, but you know, like, let's forgive them, like, we're all good people. But it's not acknowledging the hurt. And I think that's one thing I'm grateful for the Junction Church as well, is that we acknowledge the hurt that somebody's gone through, because it is real and it is raw, and it's acknowledged that I'm really sorry that happened to you, and I'm sorry that happened in this context, or this happened in this place, and how can I help, how can I learn, before we then go on to, okay, how can we help the other person? It's acknowledging actually there is hurt there. And I think too often I've heard other churches, you know, and other just people in general, actually, even if we generalize it, oh, but they're a good person, you know, they're not normally like that, or they don't normally say things like that. It's, yeah, but they still said something. So just acknowledging the hurt thing is what we have done as well.
And it's coming back to the, you know, the introductory remarks, you know, the term racism. So is it wrong? Well, of course it's wrong. We know it's wrong. But it's only when we hear the stories that I can feel just an inkling of the hurt. It's only when I hear the stories. And then that's the genius of church, is that we've been doing life now for, gosh, you're all getting old. We're doing life for years. And I get to know you, and you all serve, and you're just the most incredible people. And that's my hurt. Or the hurt that I feel is, you're amazing, and you went through that, and that's what hits home to me. So it's, you know, so racism is the big principle, but it's the stories that really hit home. So can I just say thank you for sharing so freely? That has been so helpful. It's helpful to me, and this is an ongoing conversation. This is not like a finished conversation. We have no illusions that we're going to sort it all out in this one podcast. It's we're not living in the land of delusion. However, if this can just challenge, if this can facilitate conversations, if this can help, that it's worth worth it. And if this conversation should be happening anywhere, it should be happening in church.
Definitely.
If it can happen here, where is it going to happen? So thank you for sharing, and we just appreciate you all so much, and we will return again to this conversation. Thank you, guys.